Hey everybody, Dan Ward here. Several years ago, I published this paper that introduced a framework for culture change. I've learned a lot about this topic in the 7 years since this paper came out. I've tested the framework a couple times and have continued to update it. One update in particular is that now I talk about building cultures instead of changing cultures. So in this video, we're going to take a look at what culture is and how to build a good one. Now, culture is a big topic, so let's start with a simple definition. I like to define organizational culture as mostly the shared beliefs and behaviors within an organization. Now, it's important to understand that culture is dynamic, not static. It's always in flux, so these things we're about to talk about simultaneously express culture and shape culture, and they tend to change over time. For example, some cultures believe that conformity, compliance, and bulleted lists are good. They express that belief by making slides that look like this. But the thing is, culture is never monolithic. An organization of just about any size will have subcultures and co-cultures, and small pockets of people that don't exactly fit the larger pattern while still having a connection to the larger group. So those bulleted lists may be less uniform than you might expect. Now, effective cultures don't always spread. Sometimes they remain isolated and insulated. But with a little deliberate effort, they can spread. And it's much easier to spread an internal culture than to introduce an entirely alien culture from outside. That means it's possible to shift the default by building on existing subcultures without trying to introduce an entirely new culture. Those tend to trigger the corporate immune response and get a lot of resistance. But again, culture is never monolithic, so we're not aiming for complete conformity here, even with the new culture. Okay, so let's get a bit more specific. This diagram from the original paper has 5 parts. There's the box in the middle, the practitioner, and then 4 key influence channels which affect the way practitioners see the world, make decisions, solve problems, and select courses of action. So we're going to walk through the diagram one piece at a time and talk about how to use it to develop a culture building strategy. We'll start in the middle with the box labeled practitioner. In our context, the practitioner might include program managers, contracting officers, engineers, financial analysts, basically the people who are doing the work and making decisions, taking action, solving problems. Their output is the decisions they make, the problems they solve, and the actions they take. But it's not just the decision or solution itself, it's also the decisions they choose to make or not make, the problems they choose to solve and choose to not solve. Now, one of the most obvious influences on a member of an organization is the organization's leadership. The leadership channel represents senior decision makers, the people who are in charge of an effort. This could be at the tactical, program manager level or at higher strategic levels like CEOs and such. So this channel includes metrics like what gets measured, reported, paid attention to, used, and acted upon. But also messages. What do leaders say or not say? What incentives do the leaders provide? Promotions, rewards, recognition, encouragements. How about investments? Where do the leaders allocate financial resources? And then other enablers, other non-financial resources to include permissions and waivers, as well as facilities and processes. Now the peer channel represents the practitioner's colleagues, their collaborators, and their competitors. These are the people who are working on the effort with the practitioner or are working on similar efforts inside and outside of the organization. So this channel will include informal and formal networking and mentoring activities. So the best practices that get shared around, discussed, and adopted. It includes a little bit of OJT and side conversations over coffee. Now the literature channel includes the various media that convey professionally relevant information. It's generally self-directed and self-selected and represents the things that people actually read or watch or engage with. I've never seen a significant cultural shift or a culture being built that wasn't rooted in some type of document, whether it's the the Declaration of Independence or the Agile Software Development, the Agile Software Manifesto, or any religious movement ever in the history of ever. So this channel might include formal academic studies and papers, as well as informal blogs and social media streams, videos, comics, memes, Twitter feeds, all of that. Okay, so the training and education channel, our fourth channel, this is the information conveyed in classrooms, whether it's virtual or physical. So this can include formal educational programs as well as informal self-study from external sources as well as like the in-house schoolhouse. This channel generally involves an interaction with an instructor who's not necessarily a peer or a senior leader, as well as interactions with other classmates, which may include peers and leaders. So this can include workshops, lunch and learn events, webinars, that kind of thing. So is there a fifth influence channel? Sure, and maybe a sixth and maybe a seventh. You get the picture. So the point of this model is not to definitively and comprehensively identify all the possible sources of influence. This is a deliberately and admittedly simplified sketch of some influence channels. The only thing we're trying to do here is identify a representative sample of the most important and prominent channels, then to make people aware that such channels exist, and to begin a discussion about how we can use these channels to define a specific, actionable strategy to shape and define and build a productive culture. And of course, none of this is intended to downplay the role of the individual character, personality, preferences, experiences, and opinions of the practitioner. These external influence channels are sources of influence. They're not determinants. The practitioner still has agency. In fact, we should really recognize that the arrows point both ways. Good leaders listen to and are influenced by their people. Peer relationships go in both directions. Practitioners can and should contribute to the literature and to the training and education, as well as receive and consume those. And to add a little more complexity, we could note that the channels are not entirely distinct. For example, if the boss provides a recommended reading list to all employees, that would kind of be a blend of the leadership and literature channels. And the people you meet in class could contribute to both the peer network and to the training and education experience. Now, contradictory messages from different channels can lead to confusion, friction, and conflict. This is a big point of this whole framework. When this happens, it reduces the influence that any one channel might have. Let's note that silence is a form of contradiction. Similarly, conflicting messages within individual channels can dilute the overall message. And let's recognize that a certain amount of conflict is probably inevitable. So consistent messages from multiple channels help reinforce each other and strengthen the overall influence. So our opportunity is to use these channels strategically to deliberately send a message that is consistent and clear. Okay, so why do we go through all of that? If we're trying to build a specific culture, we could start by taking a look at these influence channels to see what messages are currently coming through them, and then talk about what messages should come through them, and how we can use these channels to send specific messages that we think would be helpful for building the kind of culture that we're trying to build. Building a strategic approach to culture begins with answering specific questions about each part of the diagram. Step one is to identify the specific practitioner we're focused on, understanding their preferences, their priorities, their behaviors. Whose head are we trying to get into? Make a list and actually answer the questions on the screen. Pay particular attention to the pockets and subgroups that already exemplify the desired culture. They'll be a key leverage point later. The key is to identify and leverage existing metrics and messages that are most relevant and helpful, as well as to adjust, where possible, counterproductive messages and metrics that are coming from leadership. For peers, it's helpful to maybe map out the network. What brings them together? Where do they already gather? What's already happening? And how can we invite these peer networks to be contributing members and partners in building the culture we're trying to build? Same with literature. what's currently present? What's missing? What documents, books, and articles help reinforce and support the culture we're trying to build? And which new documents, books, articles, and other literature should we create to help amplify that message? Finally, in training and education, again, we're looking at what currently exists and what new things might need to be created. So we'll use the answers to the questions in the previous charts to assemble a specific strategy. This strategy should focus on engaging with the appropriate leaders, proposing specific metrics and messages, mapping out some peer networks, helping people connect with their relevant peer nodes, then to contribute to the literature, to spread books, ideas, and blogs around, and add new stuff to help amplify that message. And then to develop and deliver training as needed, leveraging existing courses, increasing the pipeline, collaborating with potential sources of this training, and building more as needed. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope you found it interesting and useful. Good luck building your culture.